Hey everyone, and welcome to our deep dive today, all about the data revolution.
It's pretty incredible how much things have changed.
Yeah, it used to be that data was this kind of niche thing that only scientists and big companies really cared about, but
Well, and they didn't even have that much data to work with.
exactly. Now it's like everywhere and everyone's talking about it.
Yeah, it really is everywhere, and it's changing everything.
I mean, just think about it. We've got smartphones tracking our every move. Social media knows what we like to eat and watch and buy and,
Companies are collecting data on everything from our browsing history to, like you said, what we eat.
right? And all this data is being used to do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah.
But it's also raising some big questions.
Yeah, there are definitely some ethical concerns that we need to think about.
For sure. But for this deep dive, we really want to focus on the impact of the data revolution, how it's changing our world and how we understand it.
That's a great goal.
So to kick things off, let's talk about one of the key ideas behind this whole data revolution, which is this idea of N equals all.
Yeah, N equals all. Basically, it means that instead of just looking at a small sample of data, we can now use all of it, or at least way more of it.
And that leads to some pretty big changes in how we approach problems and find solutions.
Totally. One of the best examples of this is the story of Oren Etzioni and how he got fed up with airline ticket prices.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. He's on a flight and realized that, everyone else had paid less for their ticket than him.
Right? It was so frustrating for
I
him.
bet. Who wouldn't be furious? But instead of just complaining, he decided to do something about it.
Exactly. And that something was to use data to his advantage.
So what did he do?
Well, he realized that airlines use these really complicated algorithms to set their prices, and he figured that if he could get enough data on past ticket prices, he could maybe predict when prices would go up or down.
So he built a website that would tell people the best time to buy their tickets.
Exactly. It was called Faircast, and it was a huge success. It really showed how data could empower consumers and help them, get a better deal.
It's like instead of trying to outsmart the system, he used data to make smarter decisions.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what the data revolution is all about. Using data to understand complex systems and make better choices.
This reminds me of that thing we were talking about before we started recording about how more data can sometimes be more important than having fancy algorithms.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was another really interesting finding that came out of this whole data revolution.
It seems kind of counterintuitive, though, right? You'd think that you need really sophisticated algorithms to make sense of all this data.
You would, but it turns out that in a lot of cases, just having more data is enough to dramatically improve the performance of even simple algorithms.
Do you have an example of that?
Well, there's this famous study done by Microsoft researchers who were working on improving the grammar checker in Word.
Ah, yeah, I think I read about that one.
Yeah. They found that just by feeding their existing algorithms a ton more data, the accuracy of the grammar checker went way up.
So more data equals better results, even with the same old algorithms.
Exactly. In some cases, it even outperformed more complex algorithms that were specifically designed to handle, you know, grammatical nuances.
So sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Just give it more data.
Aha! Sometimes. Yeah. It's a good reminder that we don't always need to overcomplicate things.
So we've got more data, and we're finding that sometimes simple algorithms are enough to get really interesting results.
And all this data is changing how we think about things like accuracy and measurement, too.
How so?
Well, in the past, we often aim for perfect accuracy. Like we wanted every data point to be exactly right.
Right. But with this huge amount of data, that's not always possible or even desirable.
Exactly. Take photo tagging, for example.
You mean when you add keywords to photos so you can search for them later?
Right. In the past, we might have tried to make sure every tag was exactly right. Like dog for a picture of a dog.
But now with so many photos being tagged, it's okay to have some variation.
Exactly. And that actually makes the data more useful because it reflects the real world better.
Because in the real world, things aren't always so clear-cut, right?
Right. Like what if it's a picture of a dog and a cat or a dog wearing a hat?
Uh-huh. Yeah, it gets complicated.
Yeah.
And trying to force everything into these neat categories can actually limit our understanding.
Exactly. So the data revolution is kind of forcing us to embrace complexity, and that's leading to some really interesting new insights.
I like that. Embracing complexity. It's like acknowledging that the world is messy, and that's okay.
Yeah, and in fact, that messiness is often where the most interesting stuff is.
Like finding connections and patterns that we might have missed if we were just focused on keeping everything perfectly organized.
Exactly. And that brings us to another really cool aspect of the data revolution, which is this idea of data recombination.
Data recombination.
Uh,
That sounds kind of sci-fi.
Haha, it does a bit. But it's actually pretty simple. It's basically just taking existing data sets and combining them in new and unexpected ways.
And why would you want to do that?
Well, sometimes by combining data from different sources, you can uncover hidden relationships or answer questions that you couldn't have addressed with just one data set.
Okay, can you give me an example?
Sure. There was a study done by the Danish Cancer Society where they were looking at whether there was a link between mobile phone use and cancer.
Okay.
Now, they could have tried to collect new data on people's phone use and their health, but that would have been really expensive and time-consuming.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So instead, they decided to combine existing data sets. They used data from the National Cancer Registry data on mobile phone subscriptions and demographic data.
So they were able to look at a huge population without actually having to collect any new data.
Exactly. And while they didn't find a link between phone use and cancer, the study was still really important because it showed how data recombination could be used to explore really complex questions.
So it's like putting together pieces of a puzzle to get a more complete picture.
Exactly. And as more and more data becomes available, the possibilities for data recombination just keep growing.
It sounds like this is opening up all sorts of new avenues for research and discovery.
It really is. It's a really exciting time to be working with data.
I bet. But it's not just about research, right? This
Yeah.
whole data revolution is also having a big impact on businesses and the economy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest changes is that data is becoming a valuable asset in itself.
Like a new kind of currency.
In a way, yeah. Companies are realizing that the data they collect can be used to improve their products and services, make better decisions, and even create entirely new business models.
And it's all because storing data is getting cheaper and cheaper.
Exactly. That's a big part of it.
Right.
As the cost of storage goes down, companies are holding on to more and more data, and they're finding all sorts of creative new uses for it.
So data is becoming like a raw material like oil or lumber.
Yeah, kind of. It's becoming a key factor of production.
And that's leading to the rise of these things called data intermediaries, right?
Exactly. Data intermediaries are companies that collect data from various sources, analyze it, and then sell it or create products and services based on it.
Can you give me an example? I'm not sure I quite understand what they do.
Sure. One example is a company called Inrix. They collect data from car manufacturers on things like speed location and traffic conditions,
Okay.
and then they use that data to create really accurate real-time traffic predictions.
So instead of just relying on traffic cameras or reports from drivers, they're using data from millions of cars to get a much more detailed picture of what's happening on the roads.
Exactly. And that data is incredibly valuable to all sorts of companies, from navigation apps to logistics companies to even city planners.
Wow, so it's like they're creating a whole new ecosystem based on data.
Exactly. And that's just one example. There are data intermediaries popping up in all sorts of industries.
It's amazing to think about how much things have changed in just a few years.
Yeah, the pace of change is incredible, and it's only going to accelerate from here.
Which is exciting, but also a little bit scary.
I know what you mean. There are definitely some big challenges that come with this data revolution.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to protect privacy in a world where data is being collected and analyzed on such a massive scale.
Yeah, that's a big one. We were just talking about how companies are collecting data on everything we do.
Right. And while a lot of that data is being used for good things, like, improving products and services or helping us make better decisions, there's always the risk that it could be used in ways that we don't like or that could even harm us.
Like identity theft or discrimination.
Exactly. Or even just being manipulated by companies who know more about us than we know about ourselves.
That's a pretty unsettling thought. So what can we do about it?
Well, there are a few things. One is to be more aware of what data is being collected about us and how it's being used.
So read those privacy policies, even though they're like a million pages long.
Yeah. Good luck with that. But even just being aware of the issue is a good first step.
And then what?
Well, we can also support organizations that are fighting for stronger privacy protections, and we can demand more transparency from the companies that are collecting our data.
So it's about being informed and taking action.
Exactly. And the more people who do that, the better.
It's like a collective effort to protect our privacy in this new data-driven world.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've talked about the amazing potential of the data revolution and some of the challenges that come with it.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know there's so much more to explore, but I think we're out of time for today.
Yeah, we'll have to save the rest for another deep dive.
But before we go, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay, what's that?
This data revolution is happening, whether we like it or not. So it's up to us to decide how we want to participate in it and how we want to shape its future.
That's a great point. It's not about being for or against data. It's about figuring out how to use it wisely and ethically.
Exactly. And that's a conversation that we all need to be a part of.
I agree. So let's keep talking about this, and let's make sure that the data revolution benefits everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about privacy and...
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about how much data is out there about all of us.
Yeah, and how easy it can be to identify people, even if the data is supposed to be anonymous.
Right, like with those examples we talked about, the AOL search data and the Netflix Prize data set.
Exactly. Even when companies try to protect our privacy, it can be really difficult to truly anonymize data.
And as we generate more and more data, it's only going to get harder.
So what can we do about it? Are we just doomed to live in a world where our every move is tracked and analyzed?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's not like we have to choose between the benefits of the data revolution and our privacy.
So there's a way to have both.
I think so, but it's going to require some effort from all of us.
Okay, so what can we do? What's the first step?
Well, I think the most important thing is to be aware of the issue. Understand how our data is being collected and used and what the potential risks are.
So like reading those privacy policies that nobody ever reads.
Yeah, that's a good start. But it's also about being more critical of the information we see online, questioning where it comes from and what the motives might be behind it.
So like developing a healthy skepticism towards data.
Exactly, because not all data is created equal. And just because something is presented as a fact doesn't mean it's true.
So we need to be more discerning consumers of data.
Absolutely. And we need to demand more transparency from the companies that are collecting our data.
What do you mean by transparency?
Well, for one thing, we need to know what data is being collected, how it's being used, and who it's being shared with.
So like clearer privacy policies that are actually written in plain English.
Exactly. And we need to be able to opt out of data collection if we don't want our information being used.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But do you really think companies are going to be willing to give up all this valuable data?
I think they're going to have to if they want to maintain the trust of their users.
It's just kind of like a consumer-driven movement.
In a way, yeah. The more people demand privacy, the more companies are going to have to listen.
But it feels like a bit of a David and Goliath situation, right? Like, how can individuals really make a difference against these giant tech companies?
Well, it's not going to be easy, but I think it's possible. We've already seen some progress with things like the GDPR in Europe.
The what?
The General Data Protection Regulation. It's a set of laws that give people more control over their data.
Okay.
And it's had a ripple effect around the world. Even companies that aren't based in Europe are having to adopt stricter privacy policies.
So it is possible to push for change.
I think so. But it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of people working together.
So it's not just about individual action, but also collective action.
Exactly. It's about organizing and advocating for stronger privacy protections.
And what about the role of government? Do they have a part to play in all this?
Absolutely. I mean, governments have a responsibility to protect the privacy of their citizens.
Maybe we need tougher laws and regulations around data collection and use.
I think that's definitely part of the solution.
Yeah.
But it's not just about passing laws. It's also about enforcing them and making sure that companies are actually complying.
That's a good point. Because what's the point of having laws if nobody follows them?
Exactly. So we need strong enforcement mechanisms, and we need to hold companies accountable when they violate our privacy.
So it's a multi-pronged approach: education, advocacy, legislation, and enforcement.
Exactly. It's going to take a lot of work, but I think it's worth it.
Because the stakes are pretty high, right?
Yeah.
I mean, our privacy is a fundamental right.
It is. And it's something that we need to fight to protect.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of privacy, but what about the other side of the coin? How can we use data for good?
Oh, there's so many ways. Data is being used to do amazing things in all sorts of fields.
Like what?
Well, in healthcare, data is being used to develop new treatments and cures for diseases.
Oh, wow, that's incredible.
And in education, data is being used to personalize learning and help students succeed.
So it's about using data to improve people's lives.
Exactly. And in the environmental field, data is being used to track pollution levels and protect endangered species.
So data can be a powerful tool for good.
It absolutely can. But it's important to remember that data is just a tool. It's how we use it that matters.
So we need to be thoughtful and intentional about how we collect, analyze, and use data.
Exactly. And we need to make sure that we're using it in a way that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Because the data revolution has the potential to be incredibly transformative, but only if we use it wisely.
I agree. It's a powerful force for change, but it's up to us to make sure that change is positive.
I like that data is a force for positive change. It's a good reminder that we're not just passive observers in this data revolution, we're active participants.
See, exactly. We have the power to shape the future of data and how it's used.
So what can we do to make sure that the data revolution benefits everyone?
Well, one thing we can do is support organizations that are working to promote data literacy and ethical data use.
So like educating people about the power and potential of data.
Exactly, because the more people understand about data, the better equipped we'll be to use it for good.
And what about the role of government? Do they have a part to play in all this?
I think so. I mean, governments can play a role in funding data literacy programs and supporting research into ethical data use.
So it's about creating a more informed and engaged public.
Exactly, because the data revolution is going to affect all of us, so we all need to be a part of the conversation.
I agree. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I feel like I've learned so much about the data revolution.
Me too. It's a complex topic, but it's one that's worth exploring.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to come back to this in another deep dive.
For sure. But for now, let's move on to the final part of our discussion, where we'll explore how the data revolution is changing the nature of expertise.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, so we've covered a ton of ground already about data, and you know how it's changing the world.
We've talked about everything from airline tickets to privacy.
Exactly. And I think it's time to tackle something that's been on my mind this whole time.
What's that?
What about experts? I mean, does this data revolution mean that experts are becoming obsolete?
That's a question a lot of people are asking. It's a really interesting one, too.
Because it seems like with all this data and these fancy algorithms, we don't really need experts anymore, right?
Well, not so fast. I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay, so how would you describe it?
I think it's more accurate to say that the nature of expertise is changing.
So it's not that we don't need experts anymore. It's just that what it means to be an expert is different now.
Exactly. It's not about data versus humans. It's about data and humans working together.
So like a partnership.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Human experts bring their experience, their intuition, their deep understanding of their field.
And data analysis can provide them with new insights and help them make better decisions.
Precisely. It's like having a powerful new tool in your toolkit.
Okay, I like that analogy. So instead of replacing experts, data is actually augmenting their abilities.
Exactly. And in some cases, data analysis can even outperform human experts.
Really? You mean like in those medical diagnoses we talked about where algorithms can sometimes be more accurate than doctors?
Exactly. Especially when it comes to things like image analysis. Algorithms can pick up on subtle patterns that humans might miss.
That's pretty amazing. But it also makes me wonder what happens to the role of the doctor in those situations.
Well, I think it's important to remember that algorithms are just tools. They can provide us with information, but they can't replace human judgment.
So the doctor is still the one who makes the final decision based on the information provided by the algorithm.
Exactly. The algorithm might flag something that looks suspicious, but it's up to the doctor to interpret that information and decide on the best course of treatment.
So it's not a case of either, it's about both hand.
Exactly. Data and humans working together to achieve better outcomes.
And this applies to other fields as well, right? Not just medicine.
Absolutely. We're seeing this in everything from finance to law to education.
So basically any field where there's a need for expertise, data analysis is playing an increasingly important role.
Exactly. And I think this is only going to continue as more and more data becomes available.
Which is exciting, but also a little bit daunting. I mean, it feels like we're all going to have to become data experts just to keep up.
Well, I don't think everyone needs to become a data scientist, but I do think that data literacy is going to become an increasingly important skill.
Data literacy, what does that mean?
It basically means being able to understand and work with data, being able to interpret data visualizations, identify potential biases, and make informed decisions based on data.
So it's like a basic understanding of how data works and how it can be used.
Exactly. And I think it's something that should be taught in schools, just like we teach reading and writing.
That's a great idea. Because if data is going to be such a big part of our lives, we need to make sure that everyone has the skills to navigate this new data-driven world.
Absolutely. And it's not just about technical skills. It's also about critical thinking, problem solving, and ethical decision making.
Because data can be used for good or for bad. Right?
Exactly. And we've seen plenty of examples of both throughout history.
So it's not enough to just be data literate. We also need to be data responsible.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We need to think about the ethical implications of how we collect, analyze, and use data.
And we need to make sure that the data revolution benefits everyone, not just a select few.
Absolutely. It's about using data to create a more just and equitable world.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on.
It has been a fascinating deep dive into the data revolution.
Yeah, we've covered so much ground from the basics of what data is to the complex ethical and societal implications of its use.
We've seen how data can empower us as individuals and as a society.
And we've also talked about the potential risks and challenges that come with this new data-driven world.
But I think the overall message is one of hope and optimism.
I agree. Data has the potential to make our lives better in countless ways. But it's up to us to make sure that happens
It's up to us to use data wisely, ethically, and responsibly.
and to ensure that the data revolution benefits everyone.
I think that's a great takeaway for all of our listeners out there.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the data revolution.
We hope you learned something new and that you'll continue to explore this fascinating topic.
And remember, the data revolution is still unfolding, so stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.
And most importantly, keep asking questions.
That's the best way to ensure that the data revolution leads to a better future for all of us.
Until next time.